Thank you very much. So my presentation, as Joshua just introduced, is on the collaboration between CASCA, the Canadian Anthropology Society, and CULTEXP. And I'd like to begin my presentation first with a land recognition. So I'm privileged to live and work on Treaty 2 territory, which is the traditional homeland of the Dakota, Anishinaabe, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Métis peoples, and I recognize that this privilege is founded on a dark colonial heritage. So cultural expertise is a field of theoretical, conceptual, and applied endeavor, offers a myriad of opportunities, not only in terms of service to the courts on issues of urgency at small and large scales both, but also for anthropologists across their scholarly and career spectrums. So speaking both as a sociocultural and medical anthropologist trained and mentored in this dynamic area of practice by Dr. Holden, in the capacity of my role as current president of the Canadian Anthropology Society, known as CASCA, my presentation reflects a while on the remarkable synergies and professionalization pathways afforded by cultural expertise for Canadian anthropologists. The Canadian Anthropology Society is honored to serve as host and partner for the Cultural Expertise Network, launched in November 2022 and chaired by Dr. Holden. The Cultural Expertise Network serves as a forum for anthropologists' efforts to engage in critical dialogue, peer support and mentorship, and career development related to this vital, though still too often underappreciated service. Through the network, Dr. Holden brings to anthropology in Canada a wealth of topical and strategic and methodological, ethical, and practice guidelines, many of which were first trialed and refined by Dr. Holden's Euro Expert Network and its outgrowth, CULTEXP. Through the network, CASCA is poised to not simply contribute to the broad-scale promotion of cultural expertise in Canada, but also facilitate CULTEXP goals to implement training, professionalization, and mentorship for anthropologists entering this field. So based on 20 years of working and service experience with CASCA, I know it to be eminently capable of serving as a proactive and diligent partner to EuroExpert and CULTEXP both. Here I'll take a few minutes to briefly introduce the Society's historical efforts supporting anthropologists of and engaged with the law. Launched in 1974 at Laval Université by 120 anthropologists, CASCA, first called CASCA, or the Canadian Anthropology Society, sought to capitalize on the shared scholarly as well as professional concerns of anthropologists across the four fields that traditionally define North American anthropology. These are sociocultural, linguistic, biological, and archaeological streams. By 1997, CASCA was renamed the Canadian Anthropology Society. Before CASCA, national anthropologists' needs were largely eclipsed and thereby unmet by North American social scientific professional associations, save for the American Anthropological Association. Many of these associations were dominated by sociologists and political scientists, and American more often than Canadian scholars and institutes of higher learning. CASCA's earliest efforts included creating forums for dialogue and action, annual conferences for the purposes of knowledge exchange, and promotion spotlighting anthropologists' work with and for peoples, agencies, and governments. From the outset, CASCA paid special attention to the ways that the power of anthropologists' ethnographic and ethnological evidence were greater and more far-reaching than pure scholarship alone. Early on, CASCA recognized how ethnographers' empirics helped to supplement, render culturally legible and politically coherent, and even correct official records and archives, judicial and adjudicative proceedings, and the like, especially though not least for the very many Canadian First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities whose historical experiences and needs were poorly understood or neglected by the state. Indeed, though the network is a nascent endeavor, started just this past year, cultural expertise has a long, though underexplored history in Canada. Initially, such work as cultural expertise was undertaken at the behest of the Crown. However, in ensuing years, more and more applied anthropologists entered into contracted or pro bono positions with Indigenous communities, for whom anthropologists applied the key strengths of our diachronic and synchronic methodologies to generate rigorous accounts and emic explanations or insider accounts of First Nations treaty rights and claims to sovereignty, among many other issues of importance. Thanks to Canadian anthropologists' service to the Crown and communities both, not only was the judicial precedent importantly connected and corrected to accommodate Indigenous histories, needs, and points of view, through such work, anthropologists' already complex scholarly understandings of First Nations experiences, including of governance and the law, were also and even more valuably broadened and enriched. Over time, the corollary benefits of these forms of service included anthropologists' increased capacity to, quote, take positions on issues of political and social importance, particularly those that directly affected the people with whom so many of these researchers worked, Indigenous interlocutors especially. Here it's worth noting that while overt calls for advocacy were and remain contradictory to the objectivity and juridical and deontological ethics expected of anthropologists' expert testimony, advocacy is fully aligned with the core principles of the Boasian tradition in North American anthropology, which starting from the end of the 19th century, and led by the father of American anthropology, as he remains known to this day, Franz Boas, who's seen at the right of this photograph with his First Nations interlocutors, that Boas's tradition demanded that anthropologists' engagements, until then extractive and exploitive, go beyond pure scholarship to incorporate, whenever possible, allyship and action on communities rather than anthropologists' preferred terms. Indeed, Boas's insistence on ethical praxis was prescient, preceding and foreshadowing contemporary calls to service and activism, as well as decolonization, indigenization, and anti-racism by many decades. By responsibly capitalizing on this precedent, and in partnership with EuroExpert and CULTEXP, the Cultural Expertise Network's ambitions are to support anthropologists already engaged in this field and draw necessary attention to and pursue consensus building around our work's empirical, representational, and ethical importances and career potentialities. Against the backdrop of these histories and moves, there's considerable room for improvement and growth. So like the many other parts of the world where social scientists' evidence and expert testimony feature as part of court, adjudicative, and restitutive processes, too often Canadian anthropologists' efforts occur in a siloed or a stand-apart way, with anthropologists working independently with little in the way of formal training, mentorship, and oversight. Until very recently, many of us in Canada were made first aware of cultural expertise only after being called to serve the court or crown, or approached for contracting, representational, and cultural mediation and brokerage purposes by communities or agencies involved in legal proceedings at a multiplicity of scales. With disciplinary and public recognition of anthropologists' diverse contributions to Canadian legal processes and courts in cultural expertise, all too often, it's less than you see in Europe and Australia. And because so many Canadian anthropologists engaged in cultural expertise work unaware of each other's contributions, the network's goals include reversing the alienation and the enemy which characterizes our contributions to the field. Foundational to the network's goals, then, is supporting early career scholars to confidently and expertly practice and thereby fulfill the standards and ethics expected of anthropologists engaged by the courts, among other entities. The theoretical framework of cultural expertise advocates for anthropologists to be adequately supported, such as by societies and associations, ethics statements, and professionalization workshops. Demand for exactly these kinds of support is growing exponentially. Indeed, the network's launch coincides with and holds the promise to help resolve the institutional crisis and precarity which characterizes the contemporary academy. University teaching and research positions, whether tenured, adjunct, or sessional, are so scarce as to mean the likelihood of graduates obtaining employment within the academy is a virtual impossibility. Yet graduate departments continue to produce doctoral scholars without offering much, if any, specialized applied training to help them prepare for non-academic opportunities, post-degree completion, and postdoctoral fellowships. This means that Canadian global markets are flush with anthropologists possessing remarkable and actionable skill sets who enter the market eager to pursue economically but also morally meaningful work. However, they face precious few opportunities to mobilize their knowledge. Driven away from the academy because of lacking jobs and precarity, more and more anthropologists, early career scholars especially, are contracted as cultural brokers and mediators to provide country and issue-specific expertise work, though without first being explicitly professionalized to responsibly take up cultural expertise. Indeed, many enter the market unaware of the jeopardies and pitfalls associated with such work. To this end, the Cultural Expertise Network is developing an array of training and mentorship activities, some of which will be formally launched at the CASCA and American Anthropological Association joint meetings in Toronto this November, which will be attended by approximately 8,000 anthropologists. The network's initiatives seek to remedy deficiencies in early career scholars' acquisition of the skills needed to successfully engage with legal systems and processes. And by partnering junior anthropologists with those possessing lengthy experience serving courts, the network helps ensure handholding and oversight are routinely available to junior practitioners. Through the network, CASCA members will also gain access to the innumerable outputs of EuroExpert and CULTEXP database, which often offers members real-time mentorship and an anonymized case precedents for a review. Those mentored by anthropologists with a history of service to the courts more safely and capably learn the advantages as well as limits with their work. Thus, the network's partnership with CULTEXP helps ensure anthropologists are amply prepared to navigate the procedural expectations and deontological ethics of courts and legal processes. The network's goals are even more expansive and encompassing than this, though. The largest share of network initiatives will be interdisciplinary, spanning the breadth of anthropology, as well as those social sciences most closely allied with our theories, methods, and ethics. Thus, anthropologist members will be rigorously prepared to deliver testimony in the form of reports, as well as courtroom testimony on an even greater array of topics. So the network's embrace of interdisciplinarity affords members opportunities to gain the capacities needed to better apply anthropological evidence and expertise as part of their work, not only within the courts, but beyond it, such as in development in medicine and public health, and for special interest groups, businesses, and even states. With CASCA's backing, the Cultural Expertise Network's preliminary commitments also include exploring the proposed need for cultural expertise certification. CASCA is wary of the expansion of scholarly, administrative, managerial, and oversight infrastructures, many of which uncritically embody and perpetuate elitist, classist, racist, and sexist hierarchies of professional value, and place sometimes severe constraints on our work. Global experience has taught us to be very wary of the explosion of technocratic, administrative, and surveillance infrastructures and mechanisms, many of which have become typical of the neoliberal academy. It's to be expected then that in response to recent calls for additional oversight and surveillance, CULTEXP and CASCA will work together to reconfirm the many ways that anthropologist qualifications already undergo thorough initial review, such as in terms of the ways that our inputs are reviewed for their validity and fit according to the law and its precedents, and our findings put into broader context in conversations with other evidence put forward as part of legal claims and cases, not to mention being subjected to additional interrogation and rebuttal, not only by those who contract our expert inputs, the Crown or prosecution, as well as other expert witnesses and, of course, judges. These realities mean that within and beyond the courts, anthropologists work with a conspicuous degree of oversight and possibility of discipline and censure. We're strongly motivated to comply with overseeing structures. Without ethics approval, research permissions and funding can be withheld, and our findings are unpublishable. Within the legal system, there are also consequences. Inadequate or misleading testimony can lead us to being disqualified and dismissed, with the further effect that clients see their cases and claims thwarted. Put simply, with our discipline already subjected to a crisscrossing array of methodological, ethical, and practice professional standards, some of which come with consequences, some severe, CASCA and the Cultural Expertise Network are reluctant to take steps which add momentum to or reify and concretize, rather than critically unpack and reconsider additional oversight mechanisms and processes. So through training and professionalization support, the network's goals are to inculcate in its members the skill sets needed to act effectively and ethically as independent practitioners. In ways that critically uphold and amplify the vital necessity of these efforts, The network's foundational commitments include advocating for cultural expertise and its practitioners, whether they serve in the field or a complementary or standalone way. The Cultural Expertise Network CASCA CULTEXP partnership permits us to engage in advocacy that goes far beyond Canada alone. Beyond Canada's 500-strong membership, its interassociational partnerships permit us access to professional societies with memberships in the tens of thousands. These include the Canadian Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences, the World Council of Anthropological Associations in North America, along with the American Anthropological Association, the Society for Applied Anthropology, on and on. In short, CASCA serves as a globally recognized forum and partner for cultural expertise's growth and propagation. There's also this. The network's goals include prizing space for interdisciplinary collegial collaboration and learning, such as this should not only involve sociocultural, political, and legal anthropologists, but also those specializing in matters of health, illness, and medical systems, as well as humanitarian concern and on. By striving to ensure the network's activities embrace and actualize the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we seek not only to resist the social barriers that see racialized, minoritized, and otherwise vulnerable excluded scholars are estranged from opportunities to serve the courts. By critical relation, the network will also vigorously advocate for anthropologists' use of an even broader array of empirics. For instance, we seek to highlight the forms of expertise and evidence previously considered unconventional or counter to precedents and courts' expectations, which until recently played too small a role in court and adjudicative processes. These formerly unorthodox empirics include Indigenous elders' oral testimonies related to treaty and sovereignty claims and the like. They also include medical anthropologists, and here I speak for myself as someone who serves the courts, are sociological assessments of the ways that the injustices of sexism, racism, homophobia, and transphobia necropolitically threaten refugees, claimants' well-being, health, and life in their countries of origin, risks that can be underdocumented on both state and scholarly fronts. Thus, the network stands poised to complement and as needed upend the social hierarchies and economies of value that have long dominated not only which anthropologists, but which types of expertise and evidence are called on and considered by courts and communities alike. So ultimately, the Cultural Expertise Network stands to offer its members the vibrant promise of professionalization and career pathways, while also expanding the field of social scientists and empirics, which can, should, and in some instances must play a role in court processes. In the doing, the network holds the power to enrich and democratize the judicial precedent for everyone, especially those persons and issues historically marginalized or bypassed by the courts. So to these end and more, CASCO's Dr. Holden and her initiatives, which flexibly, ethically, and productively address the complex realities of our work in this field, a debt of gratitude. Thank you.